Okay, so when you imagine the energy of the future, like way down the line, solar power has got to be in that picture, right? I mean, it just feels like the way things are headed, but even though solar's awesome, it still makes up a pretty small percentage of how we power the world right now. Like if you look at global electricity use, it's not the majority player yet, but there are some seriously cool things happening in the solar world, like inventions and stuff that could really change how much we rely on the sun.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much going on, and in this deep dive today, we're going to explore some of the most exciting stuff, the cutting-edge advancements that are poised to really shift the whole energy landscape.
Yeah.
We're talking about big potential changes here, so we want to unpack what these changes mean for all of us.
Right, and I think when most people, when they hear the word solar, they picture those classic silicon panels, like the ones you see on roofs or spread out in those massive solar farms, and those have been a game changer for sure, but they also have their limits.
Yeah, I mean, they can only convert so much of the sunlight they capture into usable energy, right? Plus, you need a lot of space to generate a ton of power with them. And those are just a couple of the things that researchers are trying to address with these new technologies.
Totally. We're going to look at some of those barriers, those limits, and how researchers and companies are finding creative ways to, break on through to the other side.
Exactly. I mean, we're not just talking about small improvements here. We're talking about technologies that could change the way we think about solar, like how efficiently we can generate power and even where we can set up these systems.
So let's jump into one of the areas that's got everybody super excited. This word keeps coming up. Perovskites. Now, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are familiar with this, but for those who aren't, it's basically a family of materials. They're crystals that scientists think could revolutionize solar efficiency.
And the reason everyone is buzzing about them is because of how they perform compared to the silicon solar cells that we've been using for a while. The typical silicon cell can convert about 20% of the sunlight it receives into electricity, which is pretty decent. But perovskites, man, they've shown in the lab that they can beat that number without breaking a sweat. And not just beat it, they could potentially go way beyond even silicon's theoretical limit, which is somewhere around 29%.
So like way more bang for your buck from the same amount of sun.
Yeah, potentially.
And that's huge.
And here's another cool thing. You can actually tweak, I guess the right word is tune, perovskites. You can tune them to capture different parts of the light spectrum, the parts that silicon isn't so good at catching.
Ah, okay.
And when you combine that with silicon, you get something really special called a tandem cell. So it's like a tag team situation.
Yeah.
The silicon does its thing and the perovskite does its thing, all in the same device.
Okay, so silicon is great at capturing like the red wavelengths of light.
Exactly.
But perovskites, they're more into those blue and green wavelengths. So when you stack them together, you create a solar cell that's basically a master of the entire light spectrum. And that means way more energy.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
More efficiency means we can squeeze more juice out of the same amount of sunlight. And if you think about it, that could drastically reduce the amount of land we'd need to dedicate to solar farms in the future, right? I mean, that's a big deal.
Absolutely. And there's another thing that's really exciting about perovskites. The way they're made is actually simpler and uses materials that are easier to get. So if all goes well, they could be a lot cheaper to produce compared to silicon, mass production.
Potentially, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's part of the appeal, right? Higher efficiency, lower costs. If it were that easy, we'd have it everywhere.
Right. It sounds almost too good to be true. So there's got to be a catch. What's the downside?
Well, perovskites have had this Achilles heel. They haven't always been the most stable. They tend to break down faster than silicon when exposed to things like, heat, moisture, oxygen, UV rays from the sun, all those things that an outdoor solar panel is going to have to face every day.
Right. It's no good if you have this super efficient tech that just falls apart after a year or two. It's got to be able to withstand the elements. But I've been reading about some breakthroughs in, making perovskites more durable, like making them last longer.
Yeah, that's been the focus of a lot of research, and there's definitely some exciting progress being made. For instance, there's this company, Oxford PV, and they're claiming that their perovskite cells can last for 25 years. Now, that's the standard lifespan that we expect from traditional solar panels. And apparently they've got test modules out in the real world, facing the elements for a few years now.
So they're putting their money where their mouth is. That's promising.
Yeah. They're using all that data to predict how these panels will hold up over time. And the initial numbers look good. The efficiency drop in the first year is super small.
So fingers crossed, we'll see how that plays out. But it's interesting that Oxford PV is actually gearing up to start commercial production soon. I think that says a lot about their confidence in the tech, even if those long-term results aren't fully published yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just them working on this. Their partnership with the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany is a big deal. They've built a working solar module using Oxford PV cells, and it hit a record-breaking 25% efficiency. So that's proof that this stuff can actually work in the real world.
Which is super cool. It's not all just theoretical lab stuff anymore. It's becoming a reality.
Exactly. And the momentum is building. There's another company, Cubic PV, and they were all set to build this huge factory for silicon wafers. But then they scrapped those plans and went all in on Perovskite tandem cells. So clearly they're seeing something big here.
Right. If an established player is willing to pivot like that, they must be pretty convinced about the potential.
Yeah. They're claiming they've found ways to make perovskites more durable through better chemistry, but a lot of that is still under wraps.
Secret sauce, huh? But still, it's exciting to see this kind of competition and innovation happening. I mean, it just means better technology for everyone in the end.
Absolutely. It's like a race to the top. I mean, with all this talk about increased efficiency and the possibility of lower costs, what do you see happening down the line? How do you imagine perovskites changing the way we get and use energy in the future? It's a pretty open question.
Right. I mean, there's a lot to think about. It's not just about solar farms anymore. There are so many creative ideas popping up about how to use solar energy in unexpected places.
Yeah, some really outside-the-box thinking. Like, take agrivoltaics, for example. Have you heard about this?
Yeah. It's like this really cool concept where you put solar panels over farmland, and it's kind of brilliant because you don't need to use extra land just for solar, and the crops down below, they actually help keep the panels cooler, which actually makes them work better.
Exactly. It's this win-win.
I was reading about this research that found that just by keeping those panels cooler, you could get like a 3% boost in their efficiency. That might not seem like a lot, but if you're talking about vast fields of crops, it really adds up.
It makes you wonder, I mean, could we actually produce more food and generate more renewable energy at the same time using the same land?
That's the goal. And then there's another concept, photovoltaics, which basically means you put solar panels on water.
Makes sense, right? Use that big open space.
Yeah. And again, you get that natural cooling effect from the water, so the panels are happy, and you're not taking up land that could be used for something else.
It's smart. Then you've got these things called PV trackers, which are like solar panels on a mission. They actually follow the sun as it moves across the sky, so they're always getting the most direct sunlight.
It's like a sunflower, only it makes electricity.
Exactly. And the cool thing is they can generate a whole lot more power. Some studies say it can be like 45% more compared to just having those panels sitting still.
That's a huge difference. But I guess there's a trade-off, right? Like they need some energy to run those motors that keep them moving, and they're probably better for ground-mounted installations. They might be a little tricky to put on a rooftop.
Yeah, you're right. There are always trade-offs. But the innovation just keeps coming. Then there's all this development with transparent and organic solar cells. So the idea here is to make solar cells that are lighter, a bit see-through, and they can capture a lot of that infrared light from the sun while letting the visible light pass right through.
Yeah, those are super cool.
And the applications for this stuff are mind-blowing. Imagine windows that generate electricity. I mean, can you picture that? Or solar cells embedded in our phone screens or on the roof of our cars. And while they're not quite as efficient as silicon yet, they're potentially much easier and cheaper to make.
And that means solar can go in all sorts of places it couldn't before.
Exactly. And get this, they're working on solar fabrics, like textiles that can generate electricity from the sun.
No way!
Yeah. These researchers have created these teeny tiny solar cells, like almost microscopic, that can be woven into fabrics. They've even demonstrated that they can charge small gadgets with it, like those fitness trackers people wear. It's like something out of science fiction. I mean, imagine clothes that charge your phone as you walk around.
It's crazy. Or tents that can power your lights when you're camping.
Yeah, the possibilities are endless. And then there's this whole other area that's even more mind-bending. It's called solar thermal fuels, which are basically chemical batteries that soak up the sun's energy and store it in their chemical bonds. Then later on, when you need that energy, you can release it as heat.
Wow, that's wild.
It is. I was reading about some researchers who had developed a fuel that can store energy for an incredibly long time and then release a whole lot of heat when triggered. It's like a solar-powered space heater.
That's incredible.
It really is. All of this is just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about all these possibilities, from using solar power on farms to weaving it into our clothes, it really makes you wonder how our relationship with energy might change in the coming years. Like, where might we see energy being generated in our everyday lives?
I know. It's such a cool concept.
So we've talked a lot about these new and super hyped technologies, but there's another type of solar panel that's been around for a while and is actually a major player in the market. It's called cadmium telluride, or CDT for short. And honestly, it deserves a lot more attention.
It does. Most people just think of silicon. But CDT is the second most common solar panel type out there. Mm-hmm. It's made from cadmium and tellurium, which are both kind of nasty on their own, but when you put them together, they form a stable, harmless compound. Kind of like, table salt is made of sodium and chlorine, which are both dangerous by themselves.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. But I was reading about tellurium, and it seems like it's a pretty rare element, mostly found as a byproduct of copper mining. So I'm curious, how does that affect the production of these CDT panels?
Well, it's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, it's a bit of a bottleneck, right?
You could say that. Yeah. But CDT has these great characteristics that make it super efficient at converting sunlight into electricity. It has this thing called a band gap, which is basically the minimum energy a photon needs to knock loose an electron and create a flow of electricity. Mm-hmm. And CDT's band gap is just perfect for grabbing onto that solar energy. It's also a direct gap material, which means it can absorb sunlight really well, even in a super thin layer, unlike silicon, which needs to be thicker.
And that's important because using less material can make things cheaper and more environmentally friendly.
Yeah, definitely. And when it comes to efficiency, although the average might be a little lower than the best silicon panels, CDT is still up there, often hitting the high teens in terms of efficiency percentage.
Yeah, I saw some reports that lab versions have even cracked the low 20s, so they're catching up. And it sounds like they're even better than silicon when it comes to those thin film applications, like flexible solar panels.
That's for sure. And then there's the durability factor. CDT panels are known for being pretty tough.
Right, that's a big one.
I mean, companies like First Solar, they claim their panels can still perform at 89% after 30 years. That's a really long time.
It's like a solar panel that just keeps going and going. And I've heard that First Solar, being a U.S. company, has been ramping up their CDT production big time, and they're constantly working on ways to make their panels even more efficient.
Yeah, they're definitely a major player.
And apparently the manufacturing process for CDT panels is faster than traditional silicon. So there are a lot of pluses. It's starting to sound like CDT is like the unsung hero of solar tech. It's got all these benefits: efficiency, durability, potentially faster and less resource-intensive manufacturing process, and yet it's not the dominant technology.
You're right. It's a bit of a mystery, isn't it? I mean, there are some reasons why it hasn't taken over. For one thing, people have been worried about the toxicity of cadmium. So you really need a good recycling program in place to handle these panels at the end of their life. And then there's the fact that tellurium is fairly scarce, so it's not like you can just ramp up production endlessly. Plus, while adding copper can boost the efficiency of CDT, it can sometimes make the panels less durable over the very long term.
Right. There are always trade-offs.
Always. And let's not forget, silicon had a huge head start, right? The manufacturing processes were already well established, and it captured a big chunk of the market. So for CDT to break through, it had to play catch up.
Yeah. But what's really interesting is that a lot of companies in China, which is, the biggest producer of solar panels in the world, are starting to invest heavily in CDT. So that could really shake things up.
For sure. It's definitely something to watch. I mean, it really makes you think, right? With all these different technologies out there, silicon, perovskites, CDT, each one has its strengths and weaknesses. So how do you decide which one is the best? How do you balance efficiency, durability, cost, and environmental impact? It's a tough question.
It is, and that's what makes this whole field so fascinating.
It does. It's constantly changing.
It's like a race to the top, but ultimately we all benefit from that race.
Exactly, because we get better, cleaner energy solutions.
Right. It's so clear that solar technology is just booming right now. We're seeing these huge leaps in efficiency with perovskites, and we're finding all these super creative ways to use solar power in our everyday lives. And even the older technologies like CDT are constantly evolving. It really feels like we're at this turning point for solar energy. I mean, we're on the verge of something big.
Yeah, it's definitely an exciting time to be following this.
It is.
I mean, think about it. All these advancements in solar could have a massive positive impact on the planet. I mean, if we can become more efficient, that means we can generate more clean energy from the same amount of sunlight. And we might not need to dedicate such huge chunks of land to solar farms. If we can find more ways to integrate solar into our everyday lives, then we can start relying less and less on those polluting power plants.
I like the way you think.
And if we can make sure that these new technologies are manufactured and recycled responsibly, then we can minimize their environmental impact and really make solar a truly sustainable energy source. It's all about finding the right balance.
And who knows what the future holds? I mean, that's what's so exciting. We're just scratching the surface of what solar can do.
I know. The possibilities are incredible.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. We've talked about all these amazing technological leaps, but what about the bigger picture? What fundamental changes do we need to make in our energy infrastructure, in how we use energy, even in how we think about energy as a society, to truly unleash the full potential of solar and create a clean and sustainable future for everyone? It's a challenge and an opportunity. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.